Hey, welcome to another episode of North Texas Youth Alive podcast. My name is Kyle Ibrahim. I'm the director here in my 10th year of doing this missionary directoring thing. Man, I'm excited to bring you another conversation with one of our friends, heroes that's out there on the streets, pounding it, reaching students for Christ. My friend this week is Aaron Little. Aaron is a youth pastor in San Diego, California at a church called Faith Chapel. Man, he was actually in North Texas several years ago. Grew up in North Texas, but God, some reason, took him out to Cali. And I just love Aaron. I love his passion. I love his energy. And I just wanted to get him on the call today so that you could hear a little bit about what's going on in his world and how his world can help influence our world. So Aaron, thanks for being on the call.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Glad to be here. And it has been a little while since I've been in North Texas.
Yeah, why don't you take just a minute and give us an update, how long you've been gone, where you're at in your family, what's happening with you and Jessica?
Yeah, I've been married now for 5 years, and my wife and I moved from a little town in North Texas to San Diego right at a little over 4 years ago now. So we were married for 9 months and then moved out here and lived here for over 4 years. We're still Rangers and Cowboys fans, though. We haven't adopted the West Coast teams. And Jessica's working for a company called Planning Center, which a lot of you are probably familiar with. They do services and things like that, different apps. She's working for them as a technical writer. So both of us staying really busy with ministry and jobs and things like that. But yeah, enjoying the West Coast.
Yeah. Hey, Aaron, you said something about being in ministry, married, short term only, 9 months, moved out. There's a lot of youth pastors out there, a lot of people that are going to be youth pastors. They go through a lot of transitions very fast.
Yeah.
Give us some quick do's and don'ts on doing that.
There's only one, and it's don't. No, I think through that whole process of just a lot of communication and making sure that you're both on the same page of what your expectations are. You know, there's a lot of expectations that come into marriage. Most of them are unspoken expectations that people bring into marriage. And then you throw ministry in the mix of that, and there's all kinds of expectations that come with ministry as well. And so I think just making sure that you and your fiance or your wife or wherever you're at in that stage of life, that you guys communicate expectations, over communicate expectations, so that way you're both on the same page consistently. Moving 25 hours away from family for us and friends to a place that neither of us had ever lived before, and being married only 9 months. There were lots of things that we did, I think, right, but then there was a lot of things that we did wrong. And probably the biggest one was we didn't always clearly communicate expectations on involvement with ministry, what that meant for our marriage, things like that. So just over communicate what your expectations are and invite the communication back to you from your spouse on what their expectations are through those transitions.
That's good. Good. I like that. So you've been at Faith Chapel now 4 or 5 years. Give us a couple of things you've learned. You know, how is California different than North Texas? These are some of the concrete things I've learned since I've been here.
Yeah, definitely different culture. Just so context on where I came from, I was in Byers, which is up North Texas, right against the border of Oklahoma, like the last town before you hit Oklahoma. There's 500 people in that town, so it was a tiny little town. I moved to San Diego. In San Diego County, there's 3 million people. So a little different, little difference in culture. But we learned a lot of things. One of the things we learned was that the Mexican food really is better out here, which I thought was a lie at first, but it really is. The only thing I miss is queso. There's no queso out here. Everyone just brings you shredded cheese when you ask for queso. That's killer. But on the real side of that, some things that we learned is that empowering and delegation are key. And coming from definitely small town, we could do a lot of things on our own. Smaller church, we could do a lot of things on our own. And then we moved into San Diego, and if you draw a map with 10 miles around our church, there's 50,000 junior high and high school students within 10 miles of our church. And so quickly we understood and figured out, no matter how hard we work and no matter how much we do, we will never be able to even make a dent in that number. The more staggering statistic in that is that out of those 50,000 students, about 42,000 of them do not go to church at all. So 90 to 92% of San Diego County is completely unchurched, do not attend any type of house of worship. And so for us, learning that empowering our leaders and delegating to leaders was the only way possible to even have even a dent on those numbers and those statistics. So for us, we've been working super hard on delegating and empowering and setting up leaders, and not just having adult volunteers. I think a lot of times in youth ministry, we're just like, we just need eyes, or we just need extra people to chaperone, or we just need people to be around the room. And for us, we've determined like those are great people to have, but for us to really reach the numbers we need to reach here in our area, in our local community, we have to develop leaders. It's not enough just to have adult volunteers that are just around us. We have to develop leaders, people that can lead students, that can lead other adults, things like that. So definitely learned that through that transition.
It's awesome. You mentioned so many students that don't know Jesus in your area. Yeah. Tell me about one big event, maybe big, small, doesn't matter size, a memorable event you've had lately where you saw a bunch of students come to know Jesus Christ. Kind of just tell us what happened and the results.
Yeah, we do a thing which is really, it's not a new idea. A lot of people do it. We call it Color Wars. We make it into an 8-week competition, and something that we've done for a long time, different packaging at different times. And we give points away for everything. It's a typical youth ministry event. Through that event, though, we see more students come into our church than any other time of year. And it's 8 weeks of consistency. We build our sermons through that 8 weeks to take students through a progression from salvation all the way to like through the basics of what it would mean to walk with Jesus. And then every like 3 different times through that, we're preaching a very salvation-based message, knowing there's new people in the room. At first, we weren't sure if it was working, and then we did this thing for our 60th anniversary last year where we asked people to hold up signs with the year that they came to Christ. And a bunch of our students were a part of that, and they were holding up signs, but instead of just writing like the year that they came to Christ, their signs all said Color Wars 2014 or Color Wars 2015. And so there's consistency coming back from that, where we're keeping them longer than just one event, and seeing big numbers for one event, but it's keeping them long term. So for us, it's nothing special, nothing new. I know a lot of people do it, but that's been huge for us.
That's awesome. Out of that, I want to hear, Aaron, a couple of stories. I love stories. I love students that have changed their lives. Hold up the sign that says Color War 2014. Give us a couple of stories about some students in your area.
Yeah, we have a kid named Ibrahim. His dad is a Saudi Arabian Muslim. His mom is a Vietnamese Christian. And interesting family dynamic, as you can probably assume or guess. But through that whole process and different things, and his mom's come to our church, and dude, I think the hand of God is on his life in a powerful way, and just being able to lead him and mentor him over the last 4 years, and now he's a senior this year, and just pouring into his life, and me and him, ministry is a lot, sometimes it's glamorous, and most of the time it's not. A lot of the times for the relationship I have with him is just taking him to lunch, just hearing how his week's going, making sure that he's becoming the young man that God wants him to become, and just seeing God's hand on him and seeing him lead. He's a part of our band. He serves in our kids ministry, and God just taking him to another place. That's one of the kids has been really influential for us, and we've been able to have a great relationship with him, and God's done some powerful things in his life.
It's awesome.
So we got a couple other kids too that are just God's doing some crazy things in. A kid named Azad that we met 4 years ago. He was living in a hotel down the street from our church. It's pretty common for a lot of low income people to live in hotels around our campus, because the cost of living is so expensive in California. They can pay a nightly rate on their subsidized incomes and things. They can live in hotels. So a lot of kids live in hotels with their mom or their dad. As I was living in a hotel, he actually snuck into a youth service. He was only in like 4th or 5th grade. We didn't know it. And from there, we got him in the right place after a few weeks of then realizing how old he was. And then from that point in time, over the last 4 years, man, he's grown into a young man that really loves God. He led worship or sang on our Sunday morning worship team for the first time 2 weeks ago. And he's a freshman in high school. And God's just doing powerful things in his life. And he's still in process, but it's just cool doing life with kids that are pursuing the things of God. So both those guys are just guys that I'm pouring into, and seeing God work in their life.
That's great. That's great. You talked a little bit about parents and kind of that. How do you as a church and youth ministry, number one, resource and communicate with parents, but then ultimately, how do you reach parents? Because it sounds like you got a lot of students that are coming off the streets from non-Christian homes. How do you resource and communicate? And then how do you get them? How do you win those whole families?
Yeah, I wish I had that figured out. I think one of the biggest balances, or one of the hardest balances in youth ministry, is dealing with and communicating with church parents and unchurched parents. And it feels like church parents you're communicating with, unchurched parents you're just trying to get a conversation with. And a lot of times there's a balance in that of going, I have to over communicate with one, but the other ones don't even a lot of times seem to care or want to know what's going on in their kid's life. And they just drop them off and you never even meet them. And so the balance of that is tricky for us. We release quarterly or seasonal calendar. So we try to be at least 3 months out on our calendars when people get them with parents. Social media is key for us. We still live on Facebook because of parents. We know our kids aren't on Facebook, but we still push anything that we push on social media, Instagram-ish, or Snapchat or any of those things. We push all that through our Facebook page just because we know that's where parents are living. So we're communicating constantly through Facebook, through printed calendars, things like that. I just tell parents I'm committed to making sure they know as far in advance as possible of the things that we have, and I'm not going to overload their calendar. Coming to California, the demand on time is everything is so fast paced, so quick that students don't need another thing on their calendar. So we try to we tell parents, if we're putting it on the calendar, we will be intentional with it. We're not trying to waste your time or your money. So I think that buys us a lot of credibility when we say that to them.
That's great. And have you reached, I mean, it's a goal of all of ours, and it's a real challenge. Have you seen you've been able to, through some of that, reach some families that weren't coming otherwise?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we've necessarily reached unchurched families. We've reached some de-churched families, some families that had just walked away from church, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. But then their student starts coming to our youth ministry, and then their parent decides, maybe I should give the church thing a try, or this Jesus thing a try again. And they've been out of church for 2 to 5 years, and then they've started coming back because their kid got involved in the youth ministry here. As far as unchurched families at this point, we've had some unchurched families attend, but I wouldn't say we've reached any of them at this point in time. So that's something that we're asking the question: how do we get better at that? How do we get beyond just I'm glad my kid comes to your church, and get them to actually come be a part as well and belong as well?
No, that makes sense. Aaron, one of the things that so many of us try to do is to look good and to always have it together. You talked about Snappy Chat and Instagram and all that stuff, right? I mean, everyone presents this image like it's always good, but it's not. We know that. What's your biggest struggle right now?
Oh, that's a long list. Biggest struggle at the moment for us, there's I'd say two big struggles. Number one is a clear discipleship path for students, and creating that. And we're working on that and trying to get something that students will follow, a path that they will grow on. That's part of it. The other biggest struggle for us right now is the pace of life, and making sure that people understand priority and why we do what we do, and making sure that students are a part of the environments that we create so they actually can grow. And we're constantly fighting. One of the things I miss about North Texas was Wednesday nights were kind of sacred when it came to at least UIL sports. UIL sports didn't happen on Wednesday nights, although clubs and things like that might. And on the West Coast, there is no sacred night. There's varsity sports every day of the week except for Sunday. So, I mean, it's like kids playing varsity sports. That doesn't, you might lose them for 3 months, 4 months at a time because they're playing on your Wednesday night or on your Tuesday night or Thursday night service, depending on when you do it. So, fighting that of how do we keep kids engaged even through losing them for a month or 2 months because of a varsity sport. How do we keep them engaged? That's a struggle for us that we don't have the answer to fully yet.
Yeah. Well, we know Sundays are reserved for the great God called NFL, right?
That's true.
That's
Yeah.
why nothing's on Sundays.
Yeah.
Man, you mentioned something about being busy, fast-paced life. I know that we all, as pastors and ministers, we got to feed ourselves. We can't just live on Sundays alone. We've got to have something intentional in our life that's feeding us, growing inside of us. How do you, right there in Southern California, grow? How do you feed yourself?
I try. My big things is I listen to at least one podcast a week. Obviously, I pray. I pray, spend time in the Word of God. But beyond those things, on a daily basis, I try to listen to at least one podcast a week. Listen to Craig Rochelle. He only releases one a month, so I have to find supplemental things. But right now, his is my favorite one. His leadership podcast is great. It's only 20 minutes, which is nice. So I'm constantly listening to a podcast a week. And then I try to read a book a month. Sometimes I read a book every 2 weeks, a book every, I try to at least read one a month. Best book I read recently is a book by a guy named Chris Songson. It's called When Your Church Feels Stuck. He's a local pastor out here that wrote a book called When Your Church Feels Stuck. And to be honest, you might have heard of books like Church Unique or churches that help you discover your vision and your purpose. His book is phenomenal at helping you walk through whether you're discovering your purpose for your whole church or just for your youth ministry. The book is phenomenal and very easy to walk through with a team of volunteers to discover what your mission is for your ministry. And it's very simple, easy read. You get to read it in 2 settings, probably. Very clear path. So great book to read. So for me, reading, podcasts, keep staying around people, fighting for relationship. If you want relationship with people, you have to fight for it. It doesn't happen naturally. As life gets busier, you're having to fight for those things. And the way that what we say is if it doesn't get calendared, it doesn't happen. And so the things that are most important for us, we have to put on our calendar, because if we don't, they're not going to happen.
Yeah, I like that. And I love, Aaron, that you simply said it growings with people. So many people think that I'm going to grow and it's always a book and a podcast, but it's so much more than that. That supplemental true growth comes from tried and true relationships, accountability, and friends.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned that. Hey, we're about to end this kind of conversation. What's one last thing that you would tell all youth pastors, youth leaders out there? Kind of the thing that's burning hot on your heart right now. You've been stirred up. You're going on hot sports rants. What's going on?
I would say number one, keep going. Too many guys dip out on this thing too early, and it's easy to quit and it's easy to get done. I was talking with the youth pastor last night, and he said, you can meet a guy and for the most part, within about 10 minutes of meeting him at camp or convention or wherever you touch base at, within 10 minutes, you can kind of tell if they're going to make it longer than a year in youth ministry. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. And I think, if God's called you to it, man, keep going, just keep going. And then the second thing is keep it fun. Part of the burnout reason is because we don't keep it fun, and it's work and it's a grind a lot of times, but what are you doing that's fun? What are you doing that's fun in your services? What are you doing that's fun with students? What are you doing that's fun with your spouse? What are you doing that's fun with your team? Like, what are you doing that's fun? Just keeping it fun. And then lastly, and this is like this very specific thing that we've fought hard for our whole ministry and are still fighting for it. And that's do whatever it takes to get students serving in the local church. Give them the opportunity to serve, create moments for them to take leadership roles on Sunday mornings, on Wednesday nights, whatever time you're meeting, let them lead. And if they don't lead, they're never going to take ownership. And if they don't serve, they're probably not going to stay connected. We've kind of, there's no scientific research behind this, but everyone talks about how students are leaving the church, and everyone says it's after high school. We all see the reality of that is if you don't have them serving in the local church by the time they're out of high school, yeah, that's definitely too late. But the reality is probably if you don't have them serving by the time they're a freshman or sophomore, it's very difficult. It's by the time they hit sophomore year to get them serving in the local church. But once you get them serving in the local church and understanding they're a part of something bigger than themselves and bigger than just one thing, and the church is this global phenomenon, at that point in time, man, students dive in and they begin to take ownership of their faith. And so for us, serving is key. We have about 50% of our students serve in ministry, and we fight for that number to be increased all the time. So.
It's good, Aaron. You know I'm mad at you, right? Mad at you that you left
Sorry.
North Texas. And this little call right here just reminds me how awesome you are, how great you are, and how God has got his hand all over your life. And anytime you want to come back to North Texas, man, I'll fight to find you the very best church for you to go to be in. So thanks for being on the call with us today. You're the man.
I appreciate it, man.
Praying for you out in Cali.
Appreciate it. And I like your shirt.
Thanks, man.